Greg, I think we're ready to go. If you could make us live.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the police contract labor negotiations with the city. It would be great if we could start out the meeting this morning to just have everyone introduce themselves. As a reminder, if you're speaking, I need you to speak into a microphone so that everyone can hear you. My name is Courtney Washburn. I am the Chief of Staff for the City of Boise.
I'm Jamie Sullivan, the city attorney.
Biff Jones, Chief Administrative Officer for the Department of Finance and Administration.
Damon Jones, Boise Police Union.
Kyle Wills, Boise Police Union.
Denny Carter, Boise Police Union.
AJ Veens, Boise Police Union.
Kristen Holtz, Benefits Administrator, HR.
Christine Smith, Compensation Analyst, HR.
Justin Erickson, Senior Budget Analyst.
Tammany Brooks, Boise Police Department. Adam Collier, the city's outside legal counsel.
Thanks, everybody. I appreciate that. I'm not sure if you all have a preference on who is prepared to start first.
We have no preference. We can start first or you can start first. I think we started first last time.
Yeah, it's totally up to you. Do you, I guess we have responses to the proposals you gave us last time. And I don't know if you want to start with that or if you want to share additional proposals.
We're prepared to provide some counter proposals as well as a couple proposals today. So if you want to start with if you would like to start with counter proposals, that would be great.
Do that.
And actually, before we do that, could we do some cleanup matters just real quick? I believe there was, the union was going to provide the research to support proposal C. Have you uploaded that? Is that?
We haven't uploaded that. We will provide that probably at the next meeting.
Okay. And then on the CLA cleanup language 4D, there was an objection, but you thought you were going to be able to just do some counter language. Is that something that we're able to do without a formal proposal?
Possibly today we can maybe get that
All
done.
right. Thank you.
Swing back on us on that.
Okay.
Do you guys still have the shared folder? Do you have access to that? Okay. So I think if you go to the July 20th city proposals, Tammany's put one in and you can walk through it.
Okay, so there's a folder for the city proposals for with today's date on it, 7/20, and I've dropped in the city's response to the union's proposal A 1.1. And in short, it just says that the city has rejected this proposal and that all of the language regarding discipline is outlined in the Boise Police Department Policy 12.000. And we'd invite the union leadership to collaborate and offer suggestions for the potential language changes in the policy.
So essentially the department's position is that they're not willing to negotiate an officer's rights related to discipline matters, and that they would prefer to handle it in a policy manual.
I guess in short, the language that's in the policy, language that's already in the CLA and then in the policy, we're not looking to add additional language to the CLA. I could respond to each one of the notes that you have or the proposals that you have by number and just kind of explain some rationale behind that. But at this time, we're rejecting this proposal.
Okay, perhaps that might help us like understand where the city's position is and how to get a little closer to what they think is fair.
Okay, so just for moving down the line, as far as number one, regarding the notification timeframe for an officer, a 72-hour notice is actually unreasonable and actually can't cover all of the circumstances which may occur when we receive a complaint, not the least of which could be weekends or not having enough information from a complaint to determine whether or not there could be potential criminal allegations as well. So it would actually not be feasible to be able to commit to a 72-hour notice to the officer. As far as number two, and number two, I believe is already covered in the, says it's covered on, I have a note that is covered on page 9 of the MOU civil service proposal, which would actually be something that would already be possibly put to the CLA in another way. Number 3, regarding the standard for all inquiry and complaints, which result in discipline, changing it from a preponderance to clear and convincing. Our current policy, national best practice, and actually recommendations for the standard of burden of proof from DOJ is a preponderance of the evidence and not clear and convincing. And so we're not open to changing that.
Chief, so what you're telling me is that if you decide to fire somebody over some actions that they've done disciplinary wise, that the city and the department is okay with having a 51% we think they did it and a 49% we're not sure that they didn't do it, because that's what preponderance of evidence is. I just want to make sure we're clear on that.
And my response is, at this point, based on our current policy that we've been operating off of this entire time and DOJ standard or recommendation, the answer to that is yes.
I'll just share my experience with arbitrators. Typically, whether it's a police discipline case or any other disciplinary case, is the typical standard is preponderance of the evidence. They will use the clear and convincing standard when it's something that could ruin the employee's career. So like dishonesty cases involving police officers, or potentially allegations of sexual harassment, if that's why they were terminated. But usually that's, I mean, the arbitrator decides what the standard of evidence is. And in my experience, everyone goes into the arbitration understanding that if it's one of these stigmatizing type of allegations, that the arbitrator probably will use a higher standard. But in the majority of cases, it's preponderance of the evidence.
So I think that that's a fair assessment for minor issues. Like you said, issues that are going to end an officer's career or change somebody's employment or those kinds of things. And mind you that none of this is related to any kind of criminal implications. This is all non-criminal implications as stated. So if that's the standard that people go to, is there room for that to come into a guarantee because you said probably, and it's up to the arbitrator. And that's very vague when it comes to high-end, career changing, life changing discipline. And so I guess we're open to discussion, but we would like some kind of better protection for high-end discipline that could end up in somebody losing their job or being out of work or those kinds of things. And if it's the standard that most arbitrators use, that only kind of makes me wonder why we're unwilling to do it, I guess, is my question.
What I always tell my clients is when they contact me about these potential disciplinary situations and we're talking about a termination of somebody and something that could potentially end their career, we talk about the what type of evidence we're going to need for the arbitration hearing, and how strong we feel our position is and our case is. And so typically the parties are arguing with the arbitrator about the standard of proof, and I'll be honest, the employers are always arguing it should be preponderance of the evidence, and the union's always arguing it ought to be clear and convincing, and then the arbitrator decides what they want to decide. But I don't see, I'll just say from my experience, I don't see any contracts that we write in the standard of evidence for discipline into the CBA or CLA.
We understand putting in the contract is probably a little unique to some areas. We don't have a legalized statutory Bill of Rights like many states do that protect discipline. So for our members, that protection comes from this contract. And that's kind of where we come from with that proposal. So, I mean, I understand what your position is. I understand what the department's position is. But we don't have some of the protections afforded to other law enforcement officers across the country based on statutory rights. So we're looking to protect our members for certain things. And we understand if it's a low-level complaint that's going to get a written reprimand or possibly a day off, that preponderance of evidence may be acceptable. But you have to understand when we up the ante on the fact finding and the requirements for that discipline, it also is going to limit the amount of grievances, because there's no question on our side that our member was guilty based on the probable cause, clear and convincing style of fact finding. And so it makes it easier for us to go back to members and say, this isn't going to go down the road of grievance because more likely than not, you did do this, and that's unacceptable. Instead, if it's 49%, we're unsure, it's going to end up in a grievance, and that's going to cause drama for the city and the union and cost some money, et cetera. So some of that protection is beneficial to the city because we can also limit some of our grievances going forward and have a more standard, solid place to say, hey, you did something wrong. But I understand the city's position.
Moving forward to number 4, representation. We currently have language in our policy regarding representation. And that language is actually pretty specific, that people who are entitled to representation are actually the subject of an investigation. So let me see what else we have. I'll just go back to, I believe what's mentioned in number 4 is already covered through our current policy.
So just to restate the reason we needed that, we have run into difficulties when members have asked for a union representative and are also being represented by an FOP attorney. And sometimes the FOP attorneys are more labor related, don't understand trainings, policies, and procedures like a union steward would. And so the two are beneficial. And it really comes from the Internal Affairs Department pushing back on that, is why we ask for that, because it's not a guaranteed. And so we've been doing it, but Internal Affairs has complained to us about it. And all we're really trying to do, if a member chooses to use Fraternal Order Police, which is not our entity, and not who we represent. We also would like to have union stewardship in there to help them understand what's going on and better provide a more complete investigation. So I also want to point out that although we can have an opinion on policies, the department has the right to change policies at will. And so the protection that we're looking for our members, specifically related to discipline, cannot be controlled by policy because we have no control over policy. We have a vote or a voice in policy, and the department has all the authority to change policies at their whim. And so there's a reason that we ask for these things, and it's not necessarily because of your watch, but you won't always be here. And our members work typically in the city between 22 and 30 years. Administrators come in and work between 3 and 6 years. So we also look down the future for who follows you and trying to provide some protections for the unknown.
Can I ask a question just to try to understand better the proposal related to the FOP representative? So the contracts between the city and the union, not the FOP. And I guess I don't understand why an officer would have an FOP representative or why they would need one if they're represented by your union.
So there's a different standard for the legal representation. The union has a different standard. So we screen when we apply our attorneys and when we don't, and it's a cost savings measure for us. The FOP has a different screening process. And so if a union member feels like they need a legal representation by an attorney, then they can bring in either one, or we decide as a union body whether we're going to use the union attorney or they're going to get a union steward to help represent them. And so we have had instances where officers felt comfortable, union members felt comfortable wanting legal representation from an attorney. So they've contacted the FOP and an FOP attorney has come. They've also asked us to be present to help protect them on the union side. And so the internal affairs investigator and the department over there, the division, has pushed back a little bit on having two of us in there representing them. And so, perhaps if that was something that could be put in policy, it's not that, big of a crisis for us to not have that section, but we really want that ability that if they want an attorney and we don't provide an attorney, they have that right to use, whatever attorney they want. And if it's paid for by the FOP, that's fine by us. But we also want the right to be there to protect contract issues and be a guidance to policy procedures and training and common usage, because sometimes the attorneys don't understand the training that's been provided, don't necessarily understand the past practices.
I just have a quick question for clarification. What is the union screening process with respect to grievances?
To grievances or to the use of the attorney?
How about both?
Okay. I'll let Damon speak to the grievance process.
So obviously the nature of the violation, as far as if they need an attorney versus a rep, a termination or, some major discipline. And then second to that, what was the second part of your question as far as the grievance goes? What was that? What you're at? How we screen them? Right. So basically a member will file a grievance based on the finding or the discipline. At that point, the union grievance committee oversees the grievance, reads the grievance, what it is and what they are actually wanting. And then also they have access to the file as far as the IA investigation. And then at that point, it goes to a vote to determine if a grievance moves forward or if it doesn't move forward.
And what about representation as far as moving the grievance forward? Is that part of that?
Yeah, so basically, if a member needs an attorney, he contacts Kyle, the president, and then based on the nature of the complaint, the circumstances, a determination is made. And we try to minimize, obviously, there's a bill at the end of that. We try to minimize that and when use them when we're needed. And so that's basically the process. And sometimes the executive board will weigh in on that. And sometimes just the president or the vice president and president will decide.
And so just a couple of things that I'm thinking. One, it's my understanding, and I'm not 100% sure, but I believe that members don't have a legal right to representation in employment cases here in Idaho. In the policy, it says that they could bring one person with them. I think part of the reason for the one person has to do with scheduling issues. I know that one of the complaints from union members is the length of time that it takes for investigations to be completed. And if we need to work around schedules of multiple people, that is, I mean, I think we already have an issue working around schedules if they choose to have an attorney. And I think one of the things that we've tried to do to minimize or reduce the amount of time is give a member, 3 separate options for a time and date to try and work around scheduling. So I would, at this point, say we're still going to continue with the proposal that a subject officer to an investigation would be entitled to one person in the interview. And I think we're kind of talking about 2 separate things throughout this conversation. One, the actual internal affairs investigation itself. And then secondly, kind of the grievance process after, if they want to grieve the actual results of the investigation. And if I understand correctly, this proposal is speaking primarily to the investigation itself, not necessarily the process that follows once the finding has been established.
Yeah, we're looking for some protections related to the investigation and the burden of proof and et cetera. Currently, I don't know how many times you think that the scheduling is really the issue, but sometimes they're on a quick turnaround. And if we're using an attorney, we're at the whim of the attorney. They have court cases, they have depositions. I'm sure Jamie can relate to how busy things can be. And so we're at that schedule. The city is not limited on how many people they bring in. And oftentimes we show up, I can tell you that I've shown up to internal affairs investigation in the last year. And there's been a city attorney in there. There's a second investigator, and this officer has 1 representative. So there's no pre-warning to this. There's no explanation of it. It adds for a little nervousness and disparity on the ability to defend somebody or clearly get to the issues. So I'm still not quite clear why the department is so stuck on having 1 person represent the officer. I know that the amount of discipline or the amount of investigations that occurs at the City of Boise Police Department is somewhere in the neighborhood of 40 times more than Meridian and upwards of 60 times more than Ada County. In 2021, Ada County Sheriff's Department had approximately 12 internal affairs investigations. Meridian had approximately 4 investigations. Boise City had over 250 investigations. So I get the scheduling thing, but we're just looking for fair representation and some protections. And so that's the reason that we're asking for more people in there.
Moving on to point 5, talking about the complaint being completed within 30 days of the initial date received. That too is also covered under current policy. And I know that in the past there's been issue. Well, on one hand, there's some cases that absolutely just cannot be completed within that time frame because of and I'll just use the cases regarding maybe an officer involved shooting. That case actually can't even be investigated until it's gone through the criminal process. But other issues that we've had in the past relate to a lack of internal affairs investigators. And I know the department has taken steps to try and work around that, up to and including reducing or putting lower level cases down to the supervisors to complete, so that they're completed in a more timely manner, especially as you're sitting there talking about the number of complaints. At one point, we only had one full-time investigator and one part-time investigator. I think actually for a small period of time, we only had one full-time investigator. We now currently have two, and we're getting ready to onboard a third. So to remedy that issue regarding the timeliness of the complaints being completed, one, we're putting a little bit of onus on the supervisors on those lower level complaints to get them done in a timely manner. But then the department has also taken steps by adding now up to a third internal affairs investigator to distribute the workload so that they can be completed in a more timely manner.
Is the department willing to come up with a better system through policy or procedure going forward that would make the common practice to follow the actual policy instead of the average response is, I need more time? So is there a way that the department could either change those days, how long it takes? I understand some of the difficulties of that, and we're not opposed to the challenges of that. But is there a way to get the department to kind of follow their own policy? Because right now, the best practice is they're not really not doing that because they're overwhelmed. And I get that they're overwhelmed, but that's at the burden of my membership. And so we really need some help in this regard, Chief. And if that comes through policy or procedure, we could probably do it something like that. However, that hasn't been the past practice.
And I'll just disagree with you on one point. We are following the policy because the policy states if it can't be completed within 30 days, there's an extension request made, and we are doing that. So I will agree with you, and it is the department's intention to actually expedite these investigations. We've done it within the means that we had at the time. And like I just shared with you, we have taken these steps by, one, switching over some of the lower level investigations down to the supervisor. And then we're going to be asking them, which are your members as well, to ensure that they complete those investigations in a timely manner. But then on those ones that still land in IA, we now have 3 investigators, or we will have 3 investigators. We currently have 2. We will have 3 that will be able to, like I said, take on that additional burden. I will also add that the city just recently contracted out with 2 external investigators who can handle maybe some other cases as well that turn out to be larger issues. So we are taking steps to reduce the amount of time, but I will say we have been following the policy because we've been granting the extensions when necessary, but adding the additional staff to handle those investigations is something that has been ongoing and will continue. And as we bring on that 3rd investigator, I think if we can get those investigations done in a more timely manner, that's going to be fantastic. And then also, obviously, I think we're working with everyone to try and figure out why maybe Boise PD is receiving so many complaints, and then figure out ways in which we could possibly reduce the number of complaints coming in and therefore reduce the workload on the people who have to conduct the investigations.
So I appreciate that, and I'm going to stand a little bit corrected. I would say by the letter of the law, the department is following their own policy. It's just the intent and the spirit. In the past, we've had the union notified of the extensions. Currently, that's not occurring. So on the union side, we don't know that they're being extended. And, the problem that we face, or the problem that we're trying to resolve, is that as an internal affairs investigator, I send the chief an email saying these 16 investigations need to be extended, and they're not. They're that's the common practice, is that they're getting extended, not, and I understand some of it could be a workload issue. But, I look at it from our perspective and lenses, and if I was a detective, I don't just get to push all my cases down the road because it's busy. I have to get them done, and that's my responsibility. So that's really the issue we're trying to come to. And I think that there's probably some things in here that we could refine. There's probably some things in here that we could push to a policy. But honestly, the best protection for my membership is to have some kind of protection in the CLA, because then it's got to be negotiated. You can't change it next week. And so there are some things that are very important to us in this. And like we talked about originally, we proposed it, the 72 hours, I understand that that's a little rough, and we can refine that. And we're willing to give concessions on that to make it workable. And we're talking about the formalization of the complaint, not the receiving of the complaint. And we can clean some of that language. So I appreciate your counter proposal.
Okay, I just put in the city's response to proposal B 1.0. And in short, I'll just say we actually conceptually agree with your proposal to bring in a tested for promoted rank of corporal. And obviously that I think there's some details and some nuances that need to be worked out regarding the number, which crews they would be assigned to. But you'll see that we just took out or had redlined the sentence that talked about every patrol sergeant will have a corporal, and not to say that that's not in fact the case, but I think there's a broader discussion as to how they'll be, how that would be implemented, and the number, because that could be, while I believe every patrol team is probably a good sense that there might be additional on top of that as well, and depending upon what teams we're talking about. So I just think that that's something that needs a little more refinement. And then the only other red line I had in there was taking out the minimum of 60 hours, but I agree. And I believe the city and the department will absolutely support that anyone promoted to the rank of corporal, or, and just in a broader scope of the conversation, any supervisory position would receive commensurate training. And as we talk about, training later on, I'll just say that the direction the department is working toward is actually identifying training needs for every position within the department, not just supervisors, but specialty assignments, figuring out what training people in those positions need and ensuring that they get it.
Thank you, Chief. I'd like to have a little discussion on this. I think there's a lot of things to kind of iron out, and on our side, we've had long discussions. This may be, we may want to tweak this a little bit. I don't know that going live October 1 of 2023 is maybe a realistic goal. And so on our side, we've had discussions about maybe we push it to agreeing to the concept of it, maybe coming up with a guidelines for developing a committee to steer this project with some union membership involved in that, and then determining it possibly for a future contract, but just agreeing to it within this contract. And if it goes live in this contract and the department can get it done, then maybe that's great, and not necessarily hold it to a hard, fast date, and really kind of look at it because we think it's an important facet for the citizens and the department and our members. And so I don't know how you feel about kind of developing a committee and really working through it, or if you think that by October 23, we could maybe get it done. I don't know.
Well, I can't make any guarantees. As I sit here and look at it, I'm excited about it, quite honestly, and I would like to see something like this implemented. I think it helps in a number of different areas. One, to help develop people to engage in developmental opportunities, to become supervisors in the future. I think it helps with span of control of the people out in the field. And I personally think it is possible. And if, again, I think it would take a sit down with the union to determine kind of conceptually what you guys see it as, and how the department sees those positions being utilized. And it may be that we're not that far off.
Thank you, Chief.
So I just dropped in the city's response to proposal C1.1. So in this proposal, there was strikeout language regarding what the union had proposed regarding lateral officers. I inserted language that was that I found in an email that I believe was shared with the union back in 2021 regarding laterals coming in and the step in which they are brought in at, how it was determined or viewed by the chief for him to make an ultimate decision as to what pay step they come in at. So I just basically took that language and inserted it into the proposal as a counteroffer. And then thinking back to what you had mentioned as we discussed last week regarding the corporals and the recognition that the title in and of itself is as important as the pay rate at which they were being paid. Kind of took that concept and removed any sort of titles from the chart that you had submitted, and then offered a possible pay structure more in line, I think, with what we're seeing in the area. For police officer, again, not really focusing on whether it's a senior officer or a master officer, but just in the police officer category, there would be 10 pay steps with a certain percentage in between each one, with the idea that, every year at the October 1 date, they would be eligible to move up to the next step until they reach the top step, which in this case, we used alphabetical letters, and those 10 steps, it would be step J would be the top step that an officer would reach. Moving forward with the idea of a promotional corporal position, we had inserted a corporal pay grade that would, instead of having 10 steps, would have 5, but would work in the same manner that every year, they would come in at a particular pay grade, and then every year they would move on to the next until they top out. And something just happened to my document. It just disappeared. Did that happen to everyone? No, down on the bottom. Yeah, so all the rest of that chart. Okay, so let's.
No money.
let me try this. I have no idea what just happened there. But let me try and drop it in there again and see if this one works. Okay. I won't push any buttons. Okay, so just continuing that thought, corporal in a promotional position would obviously be paid more, 5 steps for that. And then there would be a percentage between the corporal and the sergeant. Sergeant would have 5 pay steps. And the concept being, and I think it's what we all understand, that when you reach the top step in any particular position, you are there either until there is a negotiated increase, a COLA increase, or you promote to a different assignment. The recognizing that there are certain people in the union now who are at that 15 or 20-year mark in which they're receiving, you know, the higher longevity pay rate, recognizing that they would almost definitely would fall outside of and higher than the top step of the officer pay rank that we're looking at, proposing that those officers who are at that pay structure would actually remain at the pay step, so keep them whole, not reduce their pay in any way. And I guess I also want to make sure that the proposal would be that when we figure out who would go into these pay steps, officers would be brought in at a pay step that was either equal to, or in case there's not something equal to, the next step above what they are currently receiving. So at no point are we asking anyone to take a reduction in pay through this change in the pay structure. But then for the senior officers, they would continue to receive their pay rate. And then eventually, as those positions leave through attrition, either through retirement or promotion into a promoted rank, that portion of the pay scale would actually be eliminated and everybody would fall into the current schedule. Hopefully that made sense.
So just to make sure I'm tracking. So under the police officer category, it'd be a 10-year top out, basically 10 steps
Yes.
every annual. Okay. Corporal would be 5 and sergeant would be 5. And
Yes.
then we'd attrition out what we're calling currently as PO 15 and a PO
20.
corporal. They would just attrition out on be senior officers. That's where we're looking to stick them.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay, this is the city's response to Union Proposal D 1.1 regarding the training. Redlined everything with the exception of the agreement that the department shall provide a mandatory minimum of 40 hours of training annually. I'll just offer that just in the past couple of years, the city has and the department has created the TED division, which is new to the department, the Training, Education, and Development Division, which is there solely for the purpose of creating higher level of training for the department, all the way from the academy to include all in-service training. The TED division is ultimately responsible for the training topics, specific blocks of training, training schedule, the frequency of hours, and the minimum training requirement. The department's already created standards that are higher than Idaho Post, and actually, to my knowledge, TED has actually slowed down the tempo of training at the request of the union because so much training was being pushed out that we were asked to slow that down. And I know that with our current staffing levels as well, the mandatory training, the optional training, regular time off and everything, it's created a staffing issue to staff the patrol as well. But I will just say that we currently offer 40 hours of training in various topics in addition to 16 hours of the firearm. So we're actually above the 40 hours at 56. And again, I think from a perspective of the department, our focus is more on all the training topics, not just firearms and defensive tactics. So it's training not just in regards to how we use force, but a lot of the training that we're trying to implement as well is ways in which we can hopefully avoid using force in the first place. And so whether it's through crisis communications, de-escalation, conflict resolution, and other training topics as well, I think the TED division has taken a more holistic approach at the whole officer and the officer wellness standpoint and ways in which we can make them better and proficient in all areas, and hopefully in ways that we can reduce the amount of force that's being used, but also ensuring that they're competent when and if they need to use force and making sure that it's appropriate and proportional to the situation.
So just to make sure we're all on the same page, the training division existed before the TED division incorporated it. Training division was a subdivision of the professional standards division. Although the union agrees and thinks the chief did an excellent thing when he created it with the captain and subdivided it, it has been in existence for quite a long time. I worked there for 7.5 years. I'm pretty well aware of their responsibilities. It's just, I want to make sure that the chief understands the training reduction had to do with two things. It had to do with COVID, and we asked to reduce some of that contact to protect our members, and it has to do with scheduling. It doesn't have to do with the number of training, the quality of training. It has to do with the inefficiencies that currently the union has been working with TED for the last year. So I appreciate the city's counter proposal, and I understand the chief's position.
Okay, I just uploaded the city's response to the union's proposal E 1.0. And the response is that the city rejects this proposal and offers that the use of the on-body video cameras is covered in departmental policy. I will also offer that the department is currently in the process of updating the current on-body video policy, along with all the policies as we move on to a new and updated and better policy manual. And obviously, we would welcome the union's input as we move forward with that new policy language.
So when we proposed this, we had some discussions related to concerns. I just want to make sure that I understand the department is unwilling to address any of those issues outside of policy and here today.
At this point, yes.
Alrighty, thank you, Chief.
What I'm uploading now is, so those were all of the proposals offered by the union last week. I have one proposal that we're bringing forward today, and I have that titled Proposal 9, as we offered 8 last week, and I've dropped that into the folder. And this proposal is basically taking the MOU regarding the civil service rules, recognizing that it was agreed upon, I think at the time of the MOU's inception, that the ultimate goal was to take any language from this and eventually bring it into the CLA so that there weren't 2 separate documents existing. And so we have a red line copy of the MOU along with items that we are open to putting forward into the CLA.
So just skimming through it, it appears that all of the items that were controlled by the civil service rules and commission that no longer exists, that we put into an MOU related to promotional process, testing process, and all those kinds of things are removed. The only thing in there is related to discipline. Is that correct?
Yes. And some of the items that are in this MOU are items that are already covered in the existing CLA.
And the items that aren't regarding, say, testing promotion for supervisors, does the department have an idea where they're going to do with that, or can we have an idea of where we're going with that?
At this point, I think it's open for discussion.
Okay, thank you.
And with that, that is all that the city has brought forward today.
Would you guys like to take a break?
Yeah,
I think
we're
I heard a break
Yeah, we're
whisper
gonna
over
request
here.
a,
Does 15 minutes work, or would you
15
like
minutes would be
longer?
perfect.
All right,
Thank you.
perfect. Thanks. We're back and I believe we stand ready to hear proposals from the police union.
Thank you. We're prepared to offer some counter proposals to your previous proposals. I think I just did that wrong. Share. Did it go in? It's a struggle.
Are we looking at proposal 2?
Yes, we are.
Thank you.
As soon as I can get it open. So counter proposal to your proposal 2. We obviously came to a tentative agreement on proposal 1. This is the civilian positions, section 4 compensation C. I'll let you read the proposal for a second. I'll discuss where we stand on it. So currently in the CLA, it controls the amount of civilian personnel that perform routine police officer duties in an effort to protect the city from hiring cheaper labor to do a police officer's job. We prefer to protect that and are recommending still to protect that, but we understand the city and the department's need to expand that. And so we came up with a ratio of 13-1. Currently, that we have 9 CSS positions filled, and that's a 28-1 ratio based on our officer FTE rate. The allowance of the contract currently is a 19.5 or 16 positions, and the union is willing to expand that to a 13-1, allowing for 8 more positions, understanding that the department proposed in the city's budget to exceed the current contract. We understand that need, so it's not something that we're opposed to. If the proposed FTE for the CSSs got approved last night, which I think the budget did, that would provide 17 CSSs and technically violate, if they were filled, the contract. But we understand the necessity to that, and we think that's a good program. And it benefits the citizens and the officers in the organization as a whole. So we're open to what that number looks like, but we also want to protect it from hiring 10 CSSs instead of having 2 officers because they do perform some of the same duties.
Just so the record's clear, it's not the city's intent to replace sworn officers with civilians, but I believe the concern from the union is based on past experience. Am I remembering this correctly?
That is correct. I mean, current administrations on both the city side and the department side have not had problems in this regard, but we can't speak to the same language for past.
Okay, thank you.
And Denny, I just want to ask one clarifying question. The ratio that you're talking about is actual authorized numbers, PCNs, not whether they're filled or not, but just that ratio that you're talking about is the actual authorized number of sworn positions that we have.
Correct. Current sworn positions, whether they're filled or not.
Okay, thank you.
We feel like that also gives the department the opportunity as it expands to expand that program without having to negotiate it, right? And to try to play in some kind of fair capacity to expand that program as the organization expands. So this is counter proposal number 3. sorry, related to the removal discipline language and the proposed change. This is our counter proposal to that. In essence, the union is agreeable to the changes and would recommend or agree to go forward in that capacity if we attach the corrective action guide matrix and put it as a category 1, which I believe is how it's currently being handled, and memorialize that in that capacity.
And so I just have a question, Denny, in regards to the last sentence, which I believe was also language from the current CLA. And I'm curious, and maybe I just don't understand it correctly, but so if an issue arises in which an officer doesn't appear in court, and for whatever reason, the court imposes, contempt sanctions against the member, what's the reasoning behind not having an administrative, I guess, for lack of a better term, penalty associated with that event versus when they don't hold an officer in contempt or have an order to show cause?
I think we are open to that being tweaked as long as it's defined. What I don't want to see happen is an officer gets $1,000 fee and then he gets a day off, and that's another, X amount of dollars. And so if the city or the department is willing to come up with something that is amenable or that would incorporate that into the action guide or some kind of language that would, I just would hate to see, a gentleman have an error or make a mistake or whatever the reason is that they missed, which we don't condone and agree is not good. That if they get fined by a judge, that whatever discipline administratively, we appreciate and respect that it needs to be documented and that there could be some administrative view. We just would maybe perhaps look to some language to kind of minimize it. I'm not a fan of the double jeopardy where I'm getting disciplined by a judge and I'm getting disciplined by my department. But if there's some kind of low level discipline that if there was a fine and a sanction, there's other issues that come up because, technically that's a violation of law, being held in contempt, and there's some other trips. So we're open to that. Our biggest thing is we agree that it should be handled in category 1. If we need to work on that, I think we can work on that.
Okay, and that's just where I was a little bit confused. What would make, if an officer was held in contempt and fined, what would make it different than the category 1 that you're imposing or that you're recommending for a potential discipline? In other cases, why would we treat it any differently?
Well, I think that this is probably one of the unique situations where you're being disciplined and you're being disciplined. You're being disciplined by the court system, the judicial system, and you're being disciplined by the department. I don't know of any other set of circumstances where the judicial process is going to discipline you and then the organization is going to discipline you. So we just have some concerns, but I think there's some valid points that we can work through that for sure. We just want to make sure that we're not missing something there. So we're okay to adjust that.
Fair enough. Thank you.
And just one point of clarification, how often has an officer been held in contempt of court?
I would like to say in my last 26 and a half years here, never, but recently it actually happened. So once in 26 and a half years.
Thank you.
Okay, dropped in removal from schedule proposal 4 from the city, a counter proposal. I'll let you read it. So related to the counter proposal, we tweaked some of the language in there, and we still feel that it's a valid process. We think that the union and the department historically have been able to work well over the years on that, and we've entertained several in the last 10 years. We've entertained several schedule changes, implemented a few, denied a few. Most of those were being brought by the membership in the union itself. But we want to keep this, and we feel like we are very flexible on that. And if the department has a better solution for the way the nut is cracked, so to speak, we've always been open to that, because typically if it's better for the department, it's probably better for my membership. And so, and definitely better for the citizens if we go that route, and that we would end up going down that road should an alternate schedule work out better. You know, our membership is very in tune with trying to make our work cohesive, and what's best for the citizens. It's a high priority on our list. It's what most guys do the job for. And so if we found something that was better, we would definitely entertain it.
So if I'm reading this correctly, the proposed change from the existing language is in the CLA is just to change it from allowing up to 3 druthering processes to 2. Everything else remains the same. Is that correct?
We added the language of contiguous days, which that portion comes from another section, which we would be okay with removing in language cleanup. But basically, we're guaranteed for scheduling 4 10-hour days that are contiguous days. And so part of that language comes from another section where it talks about the schedule. And then the bottom part of that we changed to 2 druthers, because as we entertain the possibility of going to 6-month druthers, if we leave it at 3, that would be a year and a half perhaps. And I think that might be too long. Even if it's something that's not working, we may get stuck with something a little longer than we need. And so keeping in mind that the possibility of changing how many times we druther a year and how that druther looks is still a question that we're entertaining. So we feel like 2 is a better view. And if we stuck with where we're at now, it'd still be over 6 months. It'd be an 8-month evaluation. And we feel like that would be sufficient. I dropped in counter proposal to proposal number 5 that the city proposed last week. It has to do with filling vacant sergeant positions. There is a big blank in there. I put down below a little bit of some notations. However, we are open to changing the days. I think the department needs to change the days based on efficiency for the department. We are open to hearing different days. We still feel that the union has the right to have the union fill those vacancies based on our current contract. We want to point out that the department controls the qualification process, the standard for who can test, the criteria for testing, the screening process or the evaluations, the testing. I mean, there's a bit, how that's all controlled is still a big part by the department as well as the union. And so we feel like there's enough screening that should be done on the front side, that people that are coming out on the test are people that we should promote, and that the test should take care of the fact that they may not be promoted. We also recognize that the chief has the right to take from the top 3, and he also has the right to skip over people on that list. So we feel that it needs to stay, but are definitely open to how many days the department needs to entertain that. As far as counter proposals go, that is all we're prepared to do today on the counter proposals. We would like to initiate a new proposal, and we would like to take the time to memorialize some of the current MOUs. So I'll drop those into the proposal section. The first one, they're going to come as PDFs because that's how we have them on the MOU side. The first one is related to adding the crisis negotiator sergeant to the current special operations group requirements as far as their benefits. Let's see, I just lost it. And specifically, like I said, this was an MOU covering the crisis negotiator sergeant and the compensation that the other special operation group and other sergeants were receiving. And the city had agreed to that back last July on the 14th. And we're looking to memorialize that. I don't know if the chief has any questions related to it.
No, I understand.
I dropped in the FTO memorandum of understanding related to FTO compensation and numbers. I don't know if the department wants to have a discussion related to that or if they have plans on changing that. But at this time, we want to definitely memorialize it from the December 12th, 2021 MOU. I'm dropping in the COVID MOU that we agreed to. I don't know if we have any questions related to that or if the city department wants to change that.
I'll have to look to see if this is necessary because I don't believe the city has taken any action in regards to our employees who are currently employed before we instituted a COVID vaccine mandate. But I will make sure we follow up on this one.
Okay, thank you. That's all the counters and new items that we have for today. I would ask of the city if they trying to just on the efficiency side of coming to resolutions, if they're going to propose a wage change or if they would like us to propose a wage change. And if so, how would the city like those numbers to look so we can estimate with some responsibility what we're asking for?
I think we'd appreciate a wage proposal from you, and we'd like those numbers to be as low as possible.
Somehow I figured that was your answer, Adam, but you know, I'd have 50-50 shot.
Just a follow-up question. Are you prepared to bring a wage proposal today, or is that something you intend to do at our next meeting?
We intend to do it next meeting.
So do we have any other business today? Or is there an opportunity to caucus and come back with more? Or do we just want to recess till next time? Also, you guys are so much faster than fire. They should learn some lessons in this space.
We might caucus for a brief period of time. We might be able to come to some internal resolutions on a couple things. And we'll know here if we caucused for 45 minutes,
Sounds good.
we can come up and then the answer from Biff,
Yeah, would you like me to speak to the
please.
average wage, et cetera? So on the city side, since last negotiation, we've implemented a new budget software. That's a position-based budget software. So I know on our side, as we're putting together projections on how wage proposals might impact the bottom line budget authority, we're running our numbers through that budget software. However, recognizing, the union doesn't have access to that, to run those numbers yourselves. I would be very interested to see the format that you've used in the past and become familiar with it so that when we catch proposals from you, we can review that method, we can become familiar with it. And then if there's any amendments that we would propose as you're preparing proposals and costing them out, just so I think there's value for you to have a sense of how your proposals are going to land and what the bottom line numbers might be. And I appreciate the question. I think it's a great question that you want to do your due diligence on your side to have a reasonable expectation of what the budget implications would be.
Yeah, I mean, we understand that, finances are a resource and the city has a finite amount and it's got to be used in a judicious fashion. So we would like to be able to forecast with some responsibility the compensation things that we're bringing forward if we can come to some kind of understanding of how that needs to look, even though may not be 100% accurate, we can get closer to that line and we can continue to work on that to make the process quicker and go that route. So historically, one of the factors that the union, now none of us sitting at this table were part of the negotiations last time, but our understanding is that the city and the union used a full-time employee rate that was an average based on union wages with fringe, what they were calling, which is, all the benefits to calculate some of those numbers. And so I understand you guys have software and that sounds pretty good. I guess we'll go with those numbers if you think that can get us fairly close. And my goal isn't necessarily to land to the penny because I'm not a bean counter guy like yourself, right? But that way we're in the same ballpark and then we can start whittling down to common ground, so to speak. And so I just want to make sure we're not coming out of left field with numbers and you're like, that's not even close to the calculations. And so then we got to go back. We waste a meeting and we got to go back and then we're bouncing back and forth. So if you think doing that kind of process can get us somewhat close, then that's sufficient for us. I'm just kind of trying to ballpark that.
Yeah, so the way that we proceeded with fire, and I'll look to Courtney if we want to open up a different avenue here, is as you bring a proposal, then we can run it through the tools that we have and then reflect back to you our understanding of what the cost might be. And that seemed to work just fine on the fire side. Another option could be, if you wanted to run parameters by myself and the team that helps run those numbers, would it be appropriate to reflect back to them what the bottom line impact might be for a proposal before it comes to the table? And that could help inform timing and what you want to bring and a better understanding of, what the bottom line impacts are for the proposals you're putting together.
Yeah. And I think, like I said, our goal is to be, if we say we want this, that we're somewhat close financially to what that really means. Just so you're like, well, you thought it cost $100,000, it cost $500,000.
Exactly.
And now we're back to the drawing board and we're wasting everybody's time. So I guess we'll ponder a little bit on it. I'll talk with Adam a little more offline
Okay.
and figure out what direction we want to go, or maybe when we come back from the caucus. But like I said, our goal is to represent our membership fairly, but also understand responsibility.
Great.
I appreciate that. And then just to be clear, the city stands, I think, ready to assist in the financial realm. We have the software and the expertise. In fact, in the fire union negotiations, they had assumed some of their proposals were revenue neutral, and the city responded with the economic data, painting a different picture, and those weren't argued with. We're just in a better position to run these numbers, assuming you trust our bean counter. No offense, Biff. So however we figure out the best way to do that, I do appreciate the intent not to argue about the numbers as much as the impact on the union's request to the city as a whole. So I do appreciate that perspective.
Thank you. Yeah, if we could caucus for about 45 minutes, we'll meet back here and we'll go from there.
All right, I think we're ready if you guys are.
Yeah, we have a counter proposal for the counter that you made on proposal B. I'll drop it into the union proposals regarding the corporal position. And on that proposal, we approve the struck out language from above and the added in red and took the time frame out. And we're requesting to just have a part of a committee to push that forward. Did it not come in?
Yeah, it did. It's very bottom.
So the bottom. Now we know who to blame for the disappearing proposal.
Can I just ask a clarifying question? This was your proposal to begin with, right? So I'm interested in where you started and where you're ending up.
So I think the department and us both agree that we want to go forward with that. I think the chief was optimistic, and maybe he's correct with the timeframes. And so what we're asking is, based on that information, that we actually just get to select 3 members that are part of the committee that determines what that looks like going forward, and developing those job responsibilities and tasks and having input from the union side. So the counter proposal that the city made, we agreed to the changes that were in that. And then we asked to strike the rank starting by October 1st to leave that indeterminate based on the department's ability to push that forward and design that. And just ask that we be part of a group that helps determine that.
Just to make sure I'm tracking though, you originally proposed the October 1st, 2023 date. Okay.
Yeah, we did. And I guess our position on it is, if that's past that, okay. If it's before that, okay. But the chief seems to think that we might be able to push it out in a faster fashion. So we're okay with the department determining when that comes forward, whether it comes forward to the next contract or whether it comes forward under this contract. We just want to be a part of the group that helps determine the job responsibilities and tasks and work with the department towards that. As far as the implementation, we're okay to put that on the department.
Thank you.
And if there's no questions on that, I'm going to drop a new proposal in related to the grievance process. Proposal F. Which would add 13 additional calendar days to the 32-day requirement for the grievance process in 3 locations in the contract. Ultimately, 32 days has been a tight turnaround when it comes to releasing of files and the legal requirements to that, and the department's ability to provide that. So what we're asking for is to move that to 45 days from 32 days is a more realistic number.
I'll just comment, this is so unusual. Your timelines already were so long for what I'm accustomed to seeing. Usually it would be within 14 calendar days or even 10 work days or whatever that you would have to file a grievance. So if they're on notice, why do they, tell me again, why they need 45 days to file a grievance?
Well, currently we're unable to make the 32 day date in a lot of cases. And that really comes down to the releasing of the investigation in enough time for our grievance committee to review and be well read in on what the factual finders are from the investigation. And so as we stated before, we definitely feel like we have some issues related to disciplinary related things. And I guess this is probably just a slight continuation of that. But it really comes down to the ability to, the employee has to consent to letting the grievance committee review the discipline files, and then we have to get them, and then we have to review them, and then have a grievance board to determine whether we're going to go forward with the grievance or not. And so I'll let Damon speak a little more to that since he runs that group.
The city, they have to sign off on everything that can be reviewed. So there's usually a few days there before the grievance board can even go in. And then IA itself has to set up a room, computers for us to go review video files, et cetera. So, and then we also have attorneys and stuff. So we run into scheduling conflicts. So oftentimes we do, we need more than 32 days to get all those things done and to make sure we do it properly.
Okay, and I think that's the difference. So you guys review everything first before you decide whether to file a grievance. What I commonly see is that unions file the grievance and then they get all the documents later, and they'll eventually meet just to decide whether to take something to arbitration. But you meet to decide whether to file a grievance to begin with.
Yeah, correct. So it's the responsibility of the board to be judicious with that. And if the officer has some questions or it's gray, or maybe their rights are not being upheld, yeah. And if they violated it clearly, we tell them no. And then that's the end of that.
Okay, thanks for the explanation.
That concludes our counter proposal and last little proposal. We don't have any other proposals. I don't know if the city has some.
Yeah, we have some responses we can discuss. So we talked about let me make sure I get this right. Your response to the city's proposal 2. We are agreeable to that. We can TA that one. Oh, yeah. And so that proposal, let me just pull it up. That's referring to the ratio of the sworn officers to civilian community service positions. We do have
We have a
that
printed copy as well.
I knew you would. Thank you, Jamie.
Your counter to the city's proposal 4, we had proposed to remove the scheduling pilots language. You had proposed to keep the language, but to change it from 3 druthering processes to 2. Ultimately, we're agreeable to that as well. So we can TA that one. And then you gave us a response to our proposal 5. We had proposed to delete the language about the time limit to fill sergeant positions. You want to keep the language, but you left it open for, we could extend the time period. We discussed it. If you would be willing to allow the department up to 90 days to fill sergeant vacancies, we could TA that one as well.
I think the 90 days is we can probably live with the 90 days. We would probably ask if we're going to go that far out that we come up with some language. The big fear here is that I'm one of the top 3 to be promoted. I may not be liked by the chief. and he can now extend it past 90 days, and now I'm no longer on the sergeant's exam. So I think that if it's just a matter of administrative increasing of days, and that list would stay intact as that extends out, that would be agreeable on the union side. Really, what we're asking for is just, we don't want a personality conflict to prevent somebody who's gone through that process from falling out of that supervisor ability. So I think if that's something that we could generate, we can definitely come to terms on that.
Okay. And I think our intent is not to take the 90 days. I think the city's intent would be to fill the sergeant vacancies quickly. But it would just provide some leeway.
Okay, so we can maybe quickly come up with some language for that, or if you guys want to say that the list, as that list extends, if it's up against really what we're asking is that typically in the past, historically, our tests are on a 2-year rotation. So at the end of a second year, they're expired. What I don't want is 30 days out from the end of that, then the chief has 90 days and all of a sudden we're back into that concern. So as long as we can get to that point, we are fine with the 90 days.
Okay. So we'll talk about that more. Let's see, you also brought forward the MOU on the crisis negotiation team unit, and we're agreeable to including that in the contract.
Thank you.
Yeah. And then last time, both parties had discussed a 2-year contract. We would be willing to go ahead and TA that today as well, if that's agreeable to you.
Yeah, that's agreeable.
So I've got printed copies of 2, 4, and the term of the agreement will hold on the 5 until we figure out the exact wording. On the MOU, we didn't print that, but I guess we have it on the record that we're agreeing to just incorporate that into the contract. So at some point we'll type it in and we'll TA it.
That's acceptable.
Okay, so we will scan the TAs and put them in the shared folder so that everyone's got copies of them.
So I'm looking at the calendar and our next scheduled time is on August 3rd. I do just want to encourage the follow-up with Adam to make sure we're prepared on the economic side to get through the wage proposals and anything else we can get through on that day. It's easier for us because I think we have a 2-week break to do any modeling that might need to be done on either side in the 2 weeks we have before our next meeting.
Yeah, I appreciate that. We will definitely touch base with them and we will be prepared for August 3rd.
Anything else for the day?
Not from the union side.
You
thank
made it to lunchtime. You did it. With that, the meeting will be considered closed. Thank you.